All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really striking moment in modern South Korean history, a moment where the past, well, it violently collided with the present. We're looking at a chain of events that dragged a deeply controversial figure right back into the public eye, literally decades after he left power.
Now here is the absolute crucial question that sets up our whole story. Why exactly is an 88-year-old disgraced ex-leader, a guy who is already pardoned, mind you, suddenly walking into a courthouse surrounded by a flurry of flashing cameras? I mean, for a man who'd been living a pretty quiet life, this sudden reappearance in the legal system, it's jarring, and it really demands a closer look at the history that put him there.
And the geographic irony here? It's incredibly heavy. He is standing trial in a district court in Gwangju. Now, this isn't just any city. It's the exact epicenter of a massive, tragic pro-democracy uprising against his dictatorial rule back in May of 1980. So the location itself carries this immense, heavy weight for the entire nation.
To put the timeline into perspective, it has been exactly 23 years since he last faced a criminal trial. Back in 1996, he was actually tried on treason and other charges, but he was released following a presidential pardon in December 1997. For over 2 decades, the book seemed, completely closed on his legal battles, but obviously, that wasn't the end of the story.
Section 1. Seizing Power, the late 1970s.
So the catalyst for all of this was the October 26 incident. That's the shocking 1979 assassination of then-President Park Chung-hee. Because he was a military leader, Chun Doo-hwan was put directly in charge of the investigation into this massive event. And this newly granted authority officially opened the door to his rapid, highly calculated ascent to the top of the South Korean government.
His takeover was, frankly, shockingly fast. Starting with that assassination investigation in October, he swiftly moved to what's known as the Incident of December 12. That's where he ordered the arrest of the Army Chief of Staff completely without the authorization of the sitting president. By the very next morning, he was essentially in charge of the Korean Army, acting as an unelected coup leader and the de facto ruler of the country.
The crucial point to understand here is that after the figurehead president formally resigned in August of 1980, it was the National Conference for Unification, which was the South Korean Electoral College at the time, that officially elected Chun as the successor. This whole process culminated in his official inauguration on September 1st, completely cementing his iron grip on the country.
Part 2. A Cold War Presidency, from 1980 to 1988.
His time in office was riddled with massive international threats. His foreign policy was strictly anchored in combating major communist powers. We're talking North Korea, the Soviet Union, and Communist China. And these weren't just ideological debates either. He miraculously survived deadly North Korean assassination attempts, like the 1983 bombing in Rangoon, Burma. And he had to navigate the fallout of Pyongyang bombing Korean Air Flight 858 in 1987. It was an incredibly tense era. But despite these intense threats and the constant shadow of violence, he actually made a really surprising diplomatic move. In 1985, he proposed a historic, first-ever summit between the divided North and South. Now, it's important to note here that this summit never actually ended up happening, but the proposal itself was a major moment in his overall Cold War strategy.
Part 3. The Gwangju Uprising, May 1980.
Now we turn to the dark center of his regime. On May 18, 1980, a brutal crackdown on student-led demonstrations against his junta sparked massive civilian protests all across Gwangju. As military troops filed into the crowds to suppress these protests, the situation escalated violently, and citizens reportedly began to arm themselves in response to the aggressive military presence.
According to official figures, this brutal bloodshed led to the deaths of around 200 people. It was a staggering loss of life that left a permanent, painful scar on the nation's history.
And right alongside that tragic loss of life, official reports document approximately 1,000 citizens who were injured during the military's armed suppression of the uprising. The sheer scale of the violence was immense, and it deeply impacted that community for generations to come.
Part 4. Defaming a priest, a shocking twist. So what exactly dragged him back into court today? Well, the catalyst was an explosive eyewitness account from a late Catholic activist priest named Cho Chu-yan. This priest stated unequivocally that he witnessed the military actively firing at citizens from helicopters during that bloody suppression of the Gwangju protests. In a memoir published in early 2017, the former president vehemently attacked the deceased priest's character. Instead of just ignoring the claim, he went completely on the offensive, describing the priest with these exact, highly inflammatory words: a Satan in a mask and a shameless liar. As you might expect, this written attack did not go unanswered. The deceased priest's nephew, who, by the way, is also a Catholic priest, filed a formal legal complaint over the memoir's severe insults. This specific defamation complaint is the exact spark that led to Chun's indictment in May of last year, putting the former leader back in the dock after more than 20 years of quiet civilian life.
Part 5. A divided legacy and unresolved trauma. Leading up to the hearing, the nephew demanded that the former president admit to his wrongdoing, just at least once. However, the former leader has steadfastly refused to apologize or admit any responsibility for the brutal crackdown. And this unwavering stance led directly to angry protesters attempting to block his vehicle from leaving the courthouse scene, literally demanding an apology for his role in suppressing the citizens. This standoff perfectly illustrates how defining the Gwangju Uprising remains a deeply subjective ideological confrontation in South Korea today. As we can see, it forms a sharp dividing line between conservatives and liberals. Impartially speaking, watching these events unfold brings up a lot of mixed, really raw emotions for many South Koreans, highlighting a historical wound that just hasn't fully healed.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. It really shows us how true it is that history is never actually in the past. When an entire nation holds such intensely divided memories, how do they move forward? Will they ever find common ground, or will the ghosts of 1980 continue to define the future? I'd encourage you to think about your own perspectives on this incredibly complex era and consider how the echoes of 1980 might just continue to shape tomorrow.